Good evening. Can you hear me? It's an oil painting out here. Good evening, everybody. Yes. All right, thank you. It is wonderful to see you all here this evening, albeit for a difficult subject. Thank you for coming out, and we have literally, in terms of registrants, hundreds of people online who are watching as well. It really is an honor to have you all here, and we are profoundly grateful that you find this to be clearly a time that is worthy of this discussion. And hopefully we will all leave from this gathering here this evening inspired, equipped, empowered to defend our people at this difficult time and to represent well and advocate for the state of Israel's well-being and for its defense. I would say about 6 or 7 months ago, Joe Schocken, Michelle Rosen, Steve Loeb, Will Berkovitz, and I sat down to talk about ways in which we can create programming and a process of education and enlightenment within our community to speak to an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism. Little did we know 6 months ago when we conceived of this, that of course, October 7th would happen. And so clearly, the concern about anti-Semitism and the way in which it has permeated our culture, the rude awakenings amongst many that so many of us are experiencing post-October 7th has made this evening and what's to follow even more vitally important than it was before. And so, thank you all for being here. I am grateful to be on this bima with this esteemed group of individuals. Maxima, I'll use your full name now. Maxima Patashnik is the Director of Governmental Affairs and the JCRC, I forgot that additional thing, of Governmental Affairs of the Jewish Federation and the Jewish Community Relations Council. Will Berkovitz is a Rabbi Will Berkovitz, and is the Executive Director of the Jewish Family Service. And Rivy Kletenik is an educator. That's what she told me to say, an educator, but someone who clearly has devoted herself so concertedly to our young people in this community and education for those who are young at heart. And it is really a pleasure to have all of you here this evening. And I shouldn't assume, I'm Rabbi Daniel Weiner. I'm one of the rabbis here. I work here. So let's start with kind of an open-ended question. How has the world changed for you? And in particular, how has your understanding and your engagement with the issue of this evening, anti-Semitism, changed in a post-October 7th world? Maybe start with Max, please.
Sure. So I have been saying today, as I've been seeing people, my experience as of late is that I am not going from strength to strength. I am going from crisis to crisis. And to steal Rivy's language from when we were having a conversation before coming up here, we have been catapulted off of a cliff. And I would add to that, onto a very narrow bridge or ledge through which we are walking right now. So in my world and in my work, trying to bridge the gaps within our diverse Jewish community, as well as working with other communities, I would say it has thrust everything into high gear. And the work that we were doing before to build understanding about who the Jewish people are and what anti-Semitism is and how it works has become incredibly, so much more important and critical. And then also, doing that alongside the trauma I think so many of us are carrying with us as well, and trying to figure out how to care for ourselves while we do this work.
Can I ask, so one of our goals is we just want to have a conversation and sort of have you all have a chance to listen to us think. So what surprised you?
That's such a good question. I think what surprised me was how personally I felt so deeply impacted by what happened on October 7th and what happened afterward. My family had come to the United States fleeing, violence and persecution like so many others in the early 1900s, and so I don't have any family in Israel. I have colleagues, I have friends there, and how hard this hit and how quickly the narrative shifted has been, I think, one of the most surprising things to me, and the intense lack of understanding of, on the whole, the non-Jewish community about what has happened.
Well, I would say it's being catapulted off, or the carpet being pulled out from underneath. I think that I deeply believed that the world was getting better. I think I was raised that way, and to say the sentence that we are living through the worst massacre, pogrom of Jewish people since the Shoah is, I don't even think we have begun to grapple with that and to grapple with that loss. Pogrom was what my grandfather went through, not something that we would watch on live TV. And the brutality, the massacre, the horrible nature of it on Simchat Torah. And I wondered when we found out on Simchat Torah and on Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, like, I don't think we're ever going to be able to have this Chag again. What is this holiday going to be for us? Many of us are familiar with between Pesach and Shavuot was supposed to be a glorious time, looking forward to the giving of the Torah, and then Rabbi Akiva's students died then. And then it became a time of semi-mourning. What is going to be with our Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah?
Yeah. One of the things, I think it's a good way to put it, there are two things amongst many that surprised me, and perhaps I've been describing it as rude awakenings. One is the velocity and the ferocity of the emergence of anti-Semitism in the guise of anti-Israel expressions right after. The fact that not only did the narrative shift, literally before Israel had done anything, there were already pro-Hamas rallies on the streets. The veracity and the ferocity of the anti-Semitic expressions that clearly reflect the fact that for so many people, far more than we understood, this was just kind of percolating beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to be expressed in a supposedly acceptable way, and anti-Israel is an acceptable way. The other thing that was incredibly painful to me is, as someone who has worked in, I don't like to use the word progressive because I think it's changed lately, but who have worked in left-leaning progressive circles with so many marginalized groups, social justice causes, people that I and others in the Jewish community have stood shoulder to shoulder with for decades. The fact that when we needed them to stand with us, some did, many did, but there are some significant individuals within our community and groups within our community who were not only silent, but who sought to somehow justify what Hamas did as part of resistance and liberation. And I found that to be incredibly isolating and painful, that not that I always expect reciprocity, but I just at least expect some kind of understanding after decades of working in the vineyard and the trenches with those folks. What was surprising to you?
Well, one thing that surprised me is the depth of my grief. I mean, I was just on my face for the first week where I could barely speak. And I thought that I just couldn't believe it. And as more and more, I mean, it wasn't like it was trying to be hidden, it was trying to be exposed. And then to hear that people are already denying it, like the speed at which people couldn't even allow us to grieve and to support us in grief. I was shocked by that. I was surprised by how deep it felt for me. And I've been so horribly disappointed by the nonprofit sector, generally speaking, and some of the folks who I think sometimes silence is better than using a platform to be so aggressive. in a way that is absolutely against the entire concept of diversity, equity, inclusion, and what does it mean to be non-binary, and all of a sudden it's just like split down the middle. It's like you're this is true, this is good, this is bad. And that has, I just really think it's been a tectonic shift. I think it has so radically changed how we look out at the world. And I think, the thing is, our ancestors, there's a lot of things about how our lives are that our ancestors would probably just be in shock, like just how we've done. But this thing I think they would recognize, and they would say, you got too comfortable.
I was about to say I wasn't surprised. Perhaps I'm in different circles, but I wasn't surprised. I think I was raised on the idea that B'nai Israel, the people Israel, are Am Levadad Yishkan. We are people that dwells alone. Rabbi Soloveitchik puts it beautifully in his work. We are a lonely people. And I think that is something that is the trajectory of Jewish history, that there is something about who we are as a people that we do stand alone.
Yeah, I think that when you were talking, Will, I was thinking about how when you're talking about what's been happening in the DEI spaces and what's been happening in nonprofits and social justice groups, to me, it wasn't so much as surprising as really an exposure, I think, of, to some degree, what already existed, and the relationships and allyships and collaboration that you talk about, Rabbi, that you've built over decades of work. It's not that those aren't authentic, it's that I think we thought our allies knew more about who we were and what we were experiencing and our people's history, such that it took something significant and also not that significant to rip all of that apart. And I think there are some allies that have really stood by us and continued to reach out and continued to ask, how can I learn? How can I help? What can I do? And I feel like for a lot of them, we have to find a new path forward. It's like, not that all that stuff didn't matter, it does, but how do we charter a path forward in a way that is recognizing of the reality that we're all going through? Because I don't think we can go back to the way things were before.
So go ahead, I'm sorry. I was going to say this has absolutely been a clarifying moment. I mean, I think one of the if anything constructive can come from this, it has been a clarifying moment to understand who our friends and allies are, who we should re-engage with moving forward, to work toward our shared goals based on our shared values, and I think there are plenty of people who are going to do that. But I think we also understand where a lot of people stand, and that it's futile to move forward with some of them, because this is perhaps one of the most existential expressions of attack and threat to the Jewish people, and when we really needed some people to stand with us, they were absent.
So if this is how you feel, how are our kids on campuses feeling? How are our kids in high school feeling? How are our kids even in elementary schools? How is everyone feeling out there if this is how Jewish professionals are feeling?
No, I can tell you, this is interesting. So last week, our daughter, they were doing something for Dia de la Muerte in Spanish class. And they were supposed to choose some people who have died or choose a cause. And so the teacher talked about, like Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ community, and she was going to do something, and she wanted to put an Israeli flag on her thing. And she didn't feel safe doing it. And her friend said to her, oh, you could put a Palestinian flag. And our daughter was just like...
Did you hear that? Did you hear the gasp?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that sense that she was like, that's not my people. And the fact that she didn't feel safe being able to do that. And she said, because I was afraid I'd be canceled. She's 12 years old. So that's 12 years old. It's a middle school kid. This isn't like a high school or a college student. Or I'll talk about my college student who, he's been having this awesome time in college, and all of a sudden, all these people who he thought he knew, and he thought they were his friends, and he always joked, because I think sometimes and one of the things I think we all need to really do, those little jokes those little anti-Semitic jokes, oh, I'm just kidding, blah, blah, they're not jokes. Those jokes there is substance behind those jokes. And I think when we allow them to stand, and we allow our friends to say them, and we allow our friends to let them stand, we do that at our peril. And he saw that in a very stark way. He saw his friends marching in some of those protests, friends that he had spent so much time with. And he just sort of said, like, I can't talk, they can't engage this conversation with any kind of nuance or any kind of complexity.
It's been so heartbreaking to me, and one of the most heartbreaking things, even prior to October 7th, but certainly exacerbated by it, is that I grew up in a generation that was relatively free of the kind of institutional anti-Semitism that existed in the 20th century. As a matter of fact, in 1984, Charles Silberman, the Jewish sociologist, wrote in his book, A Certain People, that anti-Semitism was over. Little did he know. Go back and Google it, you'll see.
Did he have tenure?
Yeah, probably. What is incredibly painful to me is that my children now are of a different kind, but a similar scope, are experiencing an anti-Semitism that is more akin to what my parents and grandparents experienced. The fact that I know young people who are feeling like they have to take their mezuzot off their doors, that they can't wear a kippah, that they can't have a Magen David or a chai, that they can't speak Hebrew in public, that they can't do anything that is overtly Jewish in public, particularly in some of the younger spaces. That is heartbreaking to me, particularly, as you were saying, at a time in which the rest of the culture has embraced this notion of acceptance and support and love and the affluence of every other marginalized group. And we felt like we were part of that trajectory, as you were saying, Rivy. And I think it's been another rude awakening that does not include Jews, that does not include anti-Semitism as an ism that is worthy of the same regard and concern as all the other isms that we've been attuned to be sensitive to.
So I have a question, because the flip side of this is there's a lot of folks, I'm sure, on this call and on the Zoom, people here. We all know friends and family who have kids who actually are doing the marching and are signing the letters and hold a very different view. And I'm curious, how do we navigate that reality? Because I think we could get this really, really wrong and profoundly damage the next generation's connection to any semblance of community. And I think that's a reality that we can't pretend that doesn't exist, because that's another elephant in the room. And then I think obviously the other one is the structures that got to that philosophy in the education system. But I'm just curious how you all.
Max is the youngest person on the panel.
I'm too old to be called young, but Rivy, I have something I want to share. I want to defer to you, this educator.
Well, I was thinking a couple of thoughts. So, first of all, are we getting some message from on high about how comfortable we became here in America? And I think many of us always thought, especially if we were raised by people who came to this country, that this country was different. And so I want us to, I want us to live with that let's hear that message. I then also want our young people to know, and I think that we have been living and breathing the fact that we Jews care about all people in the world. We, on one hand, I said earlier, I felt like we are an alone people. But it's so interesting that our Torah teaches about a universal message about humankind. Unlike perhaps the other two Abrahamic religions, we don't think anyone has to become Jewish to be a moral human being. We don't have an idea that you have to accept our flavor. You don't have to accept our flavor. And we raised our kids that way. And so I hope that those kinds of ideas and the fact that we care about the safety and well-being for all the Palestinians in Gaza. We don't want anyone innocent to be hurt. We have laws about how we go to war. Maimonides talks about how you must reach out in peace. How when you put a siege around a city, there must be a way out.
And
that you can't
Tohar
take away people's rights.
Neshek with the...
That's right. And so where did we not pass that on to our kids so that they can go out and say this with great pride.
So here's a question I'd have, and I just want to push on this. So we taught our kids, and this is a failure, I think, to be universalists.
I agree.
And we succeeded at it. But we didn't teach our kids, because it's not the current moment of the day in a lot of ways, how to be particularists, how to be confident in our own story.
Well, it's not an either or, right? It's a tension
I agree.
that we have to hold. And I think I am certainly of a generation that connected to my Judaism through my values and through social justice and through the very overused phrase of tikkun olam. And I think that there is a path forward that doesn't negate a choice. And how do we, as the Jewish community, as Jewish communal institutions, open up our doors and our space and stretch our comfort levels, right, with how we talk about what's going on in Israel? How do we create a space for somebody who wants to refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria, and somebody who says that's an occupation in the West Bank? How do we not be fearful of the opinions that are happening within our own community amongst young people and have honest conversations? Because we've all heard, I think, the people who say, you know, what I was taught growing up is not the reality that I'm being presented with today. And so we have to help them reconcile with holding the whole, the gray, the challenge, the complexity, and how do we, and more broadly, how do we as Jews talk about how we relate to other minority communities, other oppressed communities? That's another, I want to talk about that. But I think real honesty and having, I know the term is overused, but courageous conversations in safe spaces can create the opportunity for how do we collectively move forward with young people.
But okay, a couple thoughts. So I agree, but you shouldn't need to sacrifice the particular or the universal. I think the schools have done an amazing job about the universal. I think we have done a terrible job of a grounding, a gravitational center and pull toward the particular so that you can traverse back and forth. But if you cut that off and you just become part of the people as large, you're lost. And I think that's what I think we have not done a good job. I mean, I'm not a fan of propaganda. I'm not a fan of any of that. And the other thing that I worry about is I think, well, we are living in the gray, and that is our strength. I think that is one of the greatest things about our tradition, about how we think. There are a lot of people, the majority of the people marching, who have no gray. It's pretty black and white, and we are on the wrong side.
And that work has to be done relationally, right? Person to person, one-on-one. I don't think it's done through speeches, through resolutions, through talking points. And in terms of where we sit in the universalist perspective, to some degree we've put ourselves in this position, and some degree we've been put in this position. And by that I mean the way that many Jews could guarantee our safety here in the United States was that we said, the United States founded on the freedom of religion. We are a religion, right? And though we know we are a multi-ethnic, multiracial people, the majority of Jews in the US are white passing. And so when people look at us, they see a white religious minority. That's all they see. They don't see the rest of it.
You're not saying that we are a religion. You're saying that they see us as a religion.
Yeah, they see us solely in that one-dimensional way as a religion when we are indeed a people, right? So the way we navigate, we have to the point you were making earlier, Rabbi, about some of these connections that we've made are futile. We don't want to move forward with them. I think part of our work is figuring out which ones are truly futile and which one is an opportunity for relational work for us to really lean into who we are as a people, and how does that relate to the universal and the particular? How does that relate to other oppressed and marginalized groups?
I agree 100%. I think we also did a disservice to our young people, particularly within the Reform movement, by focusing so much on social justice and tikkun olam as the ultimate expression of Jewish values, and we talked to them a lot about the prophets. We didn't talk to them enough about the priesthood. And I think we need to focus on the particular as well, and that it's not binary, that it's complementary, that absolutely a sense of ultimate respect for the universal is to respect every single person's particular pride and to express one's own as part of that whole that whole ethos.
Can I just say that
Yeah.
was very brave of you to say? I mean that. I so deeply appreciate that you said that out loud. Because that's not an easy thing to say. It's not an easy thing to look back and say, what the heck were we thinking?
I think it's a lot, no, thank you, and I think it's a lot of what Max was saying. I think there was a sense that if we were, it's like Irving Berlin writing White Christmas, right? If we were better Americans and bought into the universal American dream and the melting pot dream more so than anybody else, that they would love us and that they would accept us.
See, I think one of our deep-seated, passed on from generation, is a tremendous desire to want to be accepted and to want to be liked. And so what we did to do that is we kept giving things away and giving things. We gave it all away, and we never were willing to say ad kan until here. There's a border, and I think frankly the Orthodox community has done an amazing job of that in some places, and I think that.
Yes and no.
Well, that's what I said. In some places.
Nobody's perfect.
But I think that's right. But I think that is really important.
Well, I think, I like to sometimes refer to the Jewish people within the Orthodox community as neon Jews. I'm not sure if that's a good thing to say or not a good thing to say, but, I would walk home with my father from shul with my siblings, and it was very often that we heard not nice things being screamed at. And I heard that said to, very often. And when you walk around with a kippah on and you are sometimes, jeered at, I think ironically, you become very proud of it. And you're saying, this is who I am. And I think we have to think across the movements about how do we deepen our kids' Jewish pride and their love of being Jewish and their wanting to be Jewish and their understanding what Judaism is and what we have given the world.
Yeah.
I could start singing I'm a Jew.
We got a lot of questions that came in advance, and I think one of the universal things that I saw in these questions was, how do I talk about what it means to be Jewish? How do I help people understand what I'm going through when so many people don't? And I think, I'm going to say this probably 10 times up here, but the relational one-on-one work, right, is so, so important. The conversations that each of us has to literally sit down and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and write down the people you are closest to who are not Jewish. Starting with maybe your spouse, maybe, your cousin, your aunt, whatever, your neighbor. Who would you feel comfortable having a cup of coffee with and sitting down and talking about, this is what I've been experiencing? Because I think when you show vulnerability is often given back, right? And for personal experience, when I feel seen, when I feel like my humanity is acknowledged and recognized, I'm willing to give that back to the other person as well. And the piece I think to how we are represented in this country as people seeing us as a white religious group is, right, it's so much more complex than that. And so when we talk to people telling them, yeah, that might be what you see, but really Jews are a people with a land, a religion, a culture, and music, and communities across the world. And what you see here in the United States, that there may be a significant number of white-passing Jews that have, for the last 50, 70 years, accumulated privilege, and I think we need to acknowledge that. When I walk into a hotel, and without a second thought, I just go and use the bathroom, and nobody's gonna stop me and be like, oh, excuse me, ma'am, are you supposed to be here? Like, that's a piece of privilege that I walk around with. But how do I reconcile that with the fact that it also feels so tenuous, and the security that we have here, right? It's because Jews are not attacked because of what we believe as a religion, which is how we've been defined, and how we've been defined that has been our safety. We're attacked because of who we are as a people. Synagogues are attacked not because of what's in the Torah, but because it's a reliable place to find Jews, right?
And not just because of Israel. And not just because of Israel.
No, because Jews are responsible for the replacement theory or whatever other thing they want. So having these real conversations, I think, is so important.
Just to even go one step further, I think whether we all like it or not, we have been, but particularly after October 7th, we are all now ambassadors of Israel and the Jewish people. Whether you like it or not, people are going to be looking to you and asking you questions. And I think we all need to avail ourselves of as much education and insight as we possibly can. Yes, absolutely, to maximize our personal networks and maybe even our professional networks, and to have relational conversations. But I think those conversations have to be substantive.
Yes.
I think it's not just connecting on a human level, which is important, and I totally understand that. But I think people are looking to us to help them to understand a lot of what's going on out there in terms of from the river to the sea or whatever. I'm going to be generous and say that I think a lot of that is ignorance, and they don't understand what they're saying, and they don't get it. They don't understand what Jews are, the history of Israel, all of those things. And I think there's an opportunity for some, for us to help them to better understand. But I think we also are advocates for ourselves, and by extension for the people of Israel, not the state of Israel, not the government of Israel, but the people of Israel.
Absolutely.
And I think we now have a greater challenge and a greater learning curve that we need to embrace for ourselves and for our community, facing outward, moving forward.
One thing I think is important, what you just said, I think I think everyone should be an educator. I think one of the things you get by just learning, reading, understanding, looking for the story behind the story, looking at the history, is not necessarily that you're going to be an expert and expected to be an expert, but it'll give you confidence when you hear things that you know are not true.
100%.
And I think that's another thing that has failed on college campuses. I think a lot of students are hearing a lot of incoming, but they don't have the confidence of knowledge to be able to say, not to give a lecture, but just to be able to say that's actually not true. When people say the river to the sea, that just means free land. That's not at all what it means. It's never what it's
What
meant.
does genocide actually
Right.
mean?
That's
What does
exactly
ethnic
right.
cleansing
Right.
actually mean?
Exactly.
What does apartheid actually mean? And how does it not apply to this
Exactly.
situation?
Yeah. So, but that requires both a sense of a strong foundation to stand upon by which you can then assert a position. But I think when people have a really weak foundation, I think they tend to be quiet. And the other thing I want to just say, what I just think is important, is I want to encourage people to have courage. Because I think you are correct. We are all, I mean, our job, this is what we do day in and day out. But everybody you know who's Jewish, it's now your jobs. And the thing that I most hope, and the thing folks that I know who are in Israel right now, and the things that I've seen and talked to daily, is the amount of unifiedness there is in that country. They are all one people, which is amazing. That they have gone from an incredibly divided country to an incredibly unified country. God, would that happen in our country for us, let alone the non-Jews in our country, but just the Jews. If we could ourselves feel that sense of pride, urgency, and agency to own our story and to not roll over, but say, stand up and be confident, because we are inheritors of something extraordinary. Our job is to pass that on to our children.
And I think that we've been too kind, perhaps, to our children when they've had the choice of soccer or Shabbat, or, and I mean.
What do they say? The god of soccer is a jealous god.
I never heard that one before. I think it is important, and now we're seeing it as important, and I hope this isn't 20/20 hindsight, but when we give in to our children wanting to not go to, whether it's Sunday school or Hebrew school or day school, or not go or not participate in things that are on Shabbat, and insist that they come for Shabbat, and insist, I think that that's our little bit of insecurity, and we're now perhaps seeing what happens from that. I want to talk about these conversations. How about the person who was lucky enough to sit next to me on the airplane? So I sit down on the airplane. It was about a week or two ago. I was from Boston, and I have a big Magen David, don't worry, Jewish star, and I put on CNN. And so the fellow next to me says, "Would you show me Israel on the map?" And I said, "Hand me your phone." And he gives me his phone. I get on Google Earth. I show it to him. And he goes, "Wow, that's so small." And I'm like, yes, it is small. He said, but there are so many Jews. And I said, well, actually, we're less than 1% of the world's population. And my friend, he was shocked.
I think it's 0.2%.
No,
That's
that-
America.
That's a great question. Have you ever asked non-Jews how many Jews there are in the world? They'll say 60 million, 80 million, 100 million. They can't believe it's only
Yeah.
16 million. It's a great point. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, he was really happy to be next to me. Didn't say another word to me the rest of the trip. And it's a 6-hour flight, friends.
Oh,
Okay. But there's a lot of, sadly, that kind of lack of knowledge out there in the
Yeah.
world. And I think that we Jews pay the price of being so visible everywhere that there's this feeling that there are just so many Jews. And
yeah, I bet 3/4 of the people who are carrying signs that say from the river to the sea don't know which river and which sea.
this is true. This is true.
I also think I think the facts are needed, 100%.
The what is needed?
The facts. I mean, and people are hungry for them. I mean, the number of people, parents, students, et cetera, reaching out, wanting resources and wanting support is huge, and I think that that's great. And then I also think there is the unfortunate reality that we think if only they knew the truth, then they would understand us. If only they knew the facts, then they wouldn't believe the way they did. And I think it is about having that human connection, but really helping people understand the three things: who Jews are, what anti-Semitism is, and how anti-Semitism functions differently from other forms of bigotry. The way that the Jewish people over thousands of years have, at best, been at second-class citizens for the most, and at worst, victims of genocide. And so how that can change so quickly, over and over and over again, the tenuousness of the safety that we have is not understood. And I think there's one more piece that is something for us to own, as I talked about with privilege, but also something for us to be aware of as we step into spaces. Generally, in progressive spaces, this is just no endorsement one way or the other, the more privilege someone has, the less they are trusted. Jews are seen, white-passing Jews are seen.
The whiter they are,
Right,
the less they
the
are
whiter,
trusted.
but also, like a white heterosexual male, right? The epitome of privilege, right? And so there is less inherent trust. And so when we're talking about asking, I'm not saying this is the way it should be. I think it is horrible this is the way it is, but the reality is that when allies in progressive spaces, in liberal progressive spaces like Seattle, when we are asking them to stand up for the Jewish community, they are giving up some of their safety and their privilege to stand with us, and I absolutely believe they should. And for us to be cognizant of that and to help provide them the education, the tools, right, to understand why they're doing this and what the reality actually is for the Jewish people, I think is where we meet them. And so how do,
But also to demonstrate to
Yes.
them that we will continue to stand with
Yes.
them on the issues that we share.
Yes.
Immigration, reproductive rights, homelessness.
Yes.
That we will continue to be there for them. And I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before. We need to continue, and it's going to be hard because we're feeling wounded, continue to walk the walk that we talk in terms of showing up for them and demonstrating for them, even if there are elements that have contempt for us, even if there are elements that, out of a sense of political intersectionality, are going to exclude us because Israel is a part of what we support, we need to still be there. God forbid we should give up our values and our principles and our objectives because we feel that we're going to be excluded by some within those spaces.
Yes.
I want to say a couple thoughts on that. One that I think is something we have to start doing is we have to point out unconscious bias when it happens directed at us. Like we have to say, that's unconscious bias. We have to say, would you say that same statement if I was any other minority? Because I don't think we're comfortable doing that, because I think we're afraid of being excluded. And the thing that I think we also have to recognize is like this letter that I know you worked really hard on to respond, the letter that was in the Seattle Times about all this multi-faith thing that was calling for a ceasefire, and they included these rabbis. I think the far left has done an amazing job of taking the microphone and making it very uncomfortable for anyone in the majority of the Jewish community, which truly is the majority of the Jewish community, to be able to respond. And I
To
think
be
we
able
need-
to even have a place.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
We are not given a place at the table. If you're willing to disavow Israel, if you're willing
That's the
to
issue.
say all the things that the left really wants, you're welcome in. If you're willing to erase part of your own identity, you're welcome. But if you're not willing to erase your identity, you're like, no, actually, I'm a Zionist. I actually do believe Israel is a place to exist as a Jewish state. You're
I want
persona
us
non
to-
grata.
I want us to realize that actually we're not so unusual, and here's what I mean. In the years leading up to the Shoah, I mean, we in America right now, this thing that's happening to us, this is not unusual, and I don't want to say, oh my gosh, we're going to have something horrible happen.
There's something
But-
horrible has happened.
I know, but
No, but we're not living in Weimar.
yeah.
Okay, Weimar Republic.
That said, how comfortable were the Jews in Vienna? How comfortable were the Jews in Hungary? How comfortable were the Jews in Germany? And maybe you're sick of hearing me refer to the book by Imre Kertész called Fateless, and he wrote 3 books, Nobel Prize winner. He describes what it was like for him when he was 13, 14, and he was called emergency to his grandparents' house, and he saw his grandfather put on a tallis, and he was like, what is that? What are tefillin? What is tallis? What's a kippah? And then he's taken to Auschwitz, and he's never heard Yiddish before. And he's, who are these people? And he's, why am I here? Why am I here? He didn't begin to understand that he was a Jew. And now we have to do our soul searching about our own community and about the children in our community and the teenagers in our community. Do they know their Judaism? Are they proud of their Judaism? Can they articulate what it is to be a Jew?
In the same way that this moment is encouraging every other marginalized, vulnerable group to express their pride and to double down on their uniqueness, we should be able to do that too.
Amen.
I have a question, though. So, all right, Thanksgiving's next week, which sort of shocks me. And
It is a shock because I think it's the 3rd week. It came out early this
so,
year.
you're sitting around your
cooking?
Thanksgiving table.
Me too.
You're sitting around your Thanksgiving
Friday
table.
night.
Your kid comes back from.
When I do Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's when you do Thanksgiving? It's a
Friday
Shabbos
night.
Thanksgiving?
I only cook for God.
Okay, all right.
Very nice. Very nice.
That's nice. That's nice.
So now my question is how do you have a conversation with your kids or your kids' friends who may have a really different view, who may have a real different view? And how do you do it where you don't alienate them and you don't start like waving facts at them? Because I don't think that's going to work. And what did you say before? If you only knew this, then you wouldn't believe that.
Right, yeah.
So how do, because I think that is going to descend on this country the way.
I think there's a mode you can go through, a thing, called clarify and verify, right?
That's, you are the expert on this.
I'm not. I'm just a mouthpiece.
You should
But
say you're the educator, actually.
so when you hear somebody, right? Say you're at a march and people are chanting from the river to the sea. If there's one person in there that you would feel comfortable with going to coffee and saying, so tell me, what do you mean by to the river to the sea? And they say, I think there should be an independent Palestinian state. And you say, well, that's great. I agree. I also think there should be an independent Palestinian state. And I think that Palestinians should have equal rights. Oh, good. I also think that there is a power in understanding exactly what someone means when they're saying that, and then also understanding not just the humanity, but like the core of what it is that they are yearning for, right? What is the justice? What is the peace that is sitting with them so poorly, and meeting them where they're at in a way that helps them understand, but also, not feel judged, and invites them in, as opposed to saying, I don't agree with you, what you're saying scares me, so I've got to keep some distance, right? My kids are 1 and 4, so I can say that.
But I would even take it one step further. I would take
I'd
it.
love to have that conversation.
Yeah,
at your
God,
Thanksgiving
please.
table.
I would take it one step further even. I would ask them, what are the implications for saying from the river to the sea? What does that mean for the 8 million Jews who are in Israel? What do you think is going to happen to them?
Yeah.
I mean, I think making people, as Joe and I were talking before, making people feel a little uncomfortable with their expressions and the implications that perhaps they haven't thought through when they've jumped on a social justice bandwagon.
Absolutely.
But you see, the thing
100%.
is I think it's challenging because this is core to people's identity. It's how they are in the world. So by pushing on this, we're pushing on somebody's whole sense of self, and it's going to be very hard for them to let that go unless it's multiple conversations over many, many years. But we have to, because I don't think it's going to do us any good to just further alienate people.
No, absolutely
I'm talking,
not.
and just to be very clear here, I'm talking about Jews in our families. I'm not talking about some random screaming on a street corner. And that's where I think, because that's our families. We need to preserve these relationships. And I'm just, how are we going to do that? And what advice would you give?
I'm incredibly fearful that we, they're basically young people, particularly on college campuses, they're kind of two groups. There are those who are pretty secure in their Jewish identity, who are feeling isolated, threatened, needing to conceal who they are. And then there are tons of folks who have been enthralled with kind of the ethos and the curriculum that's happening on college campuses now. And Israel is on the wrong side of the binary between oppressor and oppressed.
For the record, I think it starts in high school and grade
No,
school.
but I'm saying, but we're seeing it most concertedly on college
that's where
campuses.
it
But
just
we have to go.
But so how would you advise parents or friends of parents for whom this is a live question? This isn't some esoteric thing. This is like, this conversation's being had, and there's a lot of anger and a lot of deep emotions. And I think rabbis, educator, rabbi. I call you rabbi. You're my rabbi.
Ordination right here.
Rabbi. Well, there's a Torah. We could find where there's.
We need one more rabbi to get smitha. Okay, that's fine.
I want to go back to that moment on October 7th. And I would actually, and I don't want to ruin everyone's Thanksgiving dinner, but October 7th, what we saw happen to Jewish people, to people on those kibbutzim, and that was such a horrific massacre. And I'm curious, do you think it's okay to say, so you're on the side of the people that do that? I mean, we raised our kids to, they're not even allowed to hit
But
anyone.
Israel's an illegitimate state. It doesn't
No,
deserve to
but it's
exist.
not just do that. Hamas specifically.
Right.
To be a queer for Palestine is to be someone black for the KKK. I mean, it is unimaginable that people who claim to be feminists and who claim to be LGBTQI, for them to say that somehow Hamas is liberationist when they would be executed and imprisoned and persecuted within a Hamas-run state is probably.
Hamas killed of the most sympathetic people.
All the
to their
leftists,
cause.
all the leftists.
How can we not cry
I feel
for
like
these people?
I want to push back because I think this is really real. The news is just filled with thousands of innocent civilians being murdered, not murdered, killed. And I think that is the counter narrative. We know our story, we know where we stand. But that's the story that's being talked about on campus. That's the story that's being talked about in our offices, and we need to be able to respond to that.
So you
I think
have.
that's hard.
So
I think it's really hard.
It's really hard. The tough when you see the images of what is happening in Gaza, it is absolutely heartbreaking, 100%. And how do we talk about that? And
It's heartbreaking to us as well.
Yes,
and we
yes.
want to liberate the Palestinian people that deserve self-determination from Hamas that is imprisoning them and is the key obstacle to peace in the region, not just between Hamas and Israel, but in the entire Middle East with Iran and everything else. I mean, I think that we sense that pain too. We lament for that loss as well. And it's unfortunate that the only way to confront that kind of evil that from that specific group is to confront it militarily. And if we have to do that, we are as supportive of liberating the Palestinian people from that tyranny as we are defending the rights of and the lives of Israelis.
So that's interesting because I feel like it is incredibly important to humanize the Israeli experience. And the thing that I observe is nobody in the United States can have any idea what it is like to be living in Israel today. People do not understand the existential threat the country is under, and that risk is not like, there's no joy in people dying.
1,000%.
But I think that there is a sense of trauma, a sense of fear, but more existential, their existence type of existential meaning. That has to be conveyed, but we somehow have to be able to sort of humanize Israelis, because when you say colonizer or occupier, it's like you could say these words, and you do that and you erase the human. And so maybe part of what we do, and I'm really just talking this out with you all, is how do we humanize this? And how do we humanize us when we're talking to not just our family? Obviously, I hope my kids.
Well, it's to bear witness, as you were saying, Rivy, it's to bear witness to what happened on October 7th. We are watching Holocaust denial in real time.
Yeah.
Okay, they've already been saying that it was produced, it's AI, it was staged, all of these things. There's unfortunately a horrific film that's going around that the IDF has put together that is using real-time GoPro cameras from Hamas in terms of what they did, because they documented the whole thing. And as hard as it is to watch something like that, I feel like it's like Eisenhower taking in the soldiers and the press after liberating the camps. I think people have to see it, because already we're seeing the denial.
I know that one thing I keep screaming at the television is, when the shots come in on what's going on in Gaza, is give back the hostages. That's what we want. Give back the hostages. Why can't they give back the hostages? Because they're not willing to do that. Because this is what they want. They want Israel to go in and do what's going on. This is what they want. And they came in and took our people, our babies, our children. And if you're on Facebook, if you're on social media, we are crying for these people. We are crying for these people. I go to sleep crying. I wake up crying. So we're looking at these pictures. Give them back.
Can I ask a question that comes from
Fine.
curated question, please?
Yes, absolutely. I learned today that a woman gave birth.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, we saw that.
That is horrifying.
Yep.
Okay, Rivy, how do we talk to people who are a little older than Max's children about this?
Our children. So I had an incident where people came over to me in Shul. We had Minyan Or Chadash, and
Which everybody's invited to.
What's that?
Everyone is invited.
Everyone's invited all the time. And we had an event for connecting to Israel, and we had put up pictures of the hostages. And then a few days later was Shabbos, and two dads came over to me very concerned. Do you think it's okay for the kids to see those pictures? And I took a deep breath, because this is a subject we've been talking a lot about, not just the hostages, but a lot of things that we teach. And by the way, the Hanukkah story, and by the way, the Purim story, by the way, the Pesach story, and by the way, And so to a certain degree, I think we have to be not to a certain degree, we must be honest with our children. And we must tell them something sad has happened. Something very sad has happened. And we are all upset about this. And these children, now we don't want to scare them and think someone's going to come and do this to them. And yet, they go to school, if they're in a Jewish school, or they come to Sunday school, or they go to shul, or they go to synagogue, they go to temple, there's a guard outside. And we were standing here, all of us, 2018, after the Pittsburgh shooting. And I look back, and we were so raw. We could not believe that happened. And then suddenly, there's more security, and suddenly there's more guards everywhere. And we had to explain this to our children.
That is important. I think explaining to our non-Jewish friends, what does it feel like to have a guard? What does it feel like? I think explaining that, the other thing I think is important, which I think is shocking, is there's so much anti-Semitic stuff happening in our neighborhoods right now.
Yes.
And the news is not really covering it.
Oh, please,
And
there was a lot of TV outside my house about that.
Last
Yeah,
Friday, but
Well, it's because it's your house, Rivy.
I mean, it was a little bit down.
no, but I think
fire
the
trucks
point
roll.
is, if we don't point it out to people, it's not going to be pointed out to people.
I do think that there is a tendency to think that because we are living and breathing this anti-Semitism that feels so present and
Yeah.
in our faces all the time, that we assume everybody else is seeing it and
Yep.
experiencing it too. And I think the vast majority of people are not. And a lot of people are living their lives like usual and have no idea about what is going on.
I think that's a great way to align ourselves, and it's a different dynamic completely. But to our African American friends who say to us, you can't really understand how we're living and breathing this kind of thing. It's a different dynamic, but it's a similar sense of being immersed when you're in the in-group and feeling frustrated that people in the out-group don't necessarily understand and appreciate it. Let me ask
Just
you,
imagine if you're an African American Jew, then how do you feel?
100%.
That's great.
Let me ask you a question that kind of come from this, because we're beginning to wind down. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. When is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism, and when isn't it? I asked you the easy one, Max.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah. No, that was one of the main things. And listen, it's something that we're all talking about. I mean, it's at issue right now.
I think you have to look at someone's motivations, right? Like, if you're an anarchist and you believe that there should be no nation states, then somebody who doesn't believe the state of Israel should exist, it's probably not an anti-Semitic thing. I think anti-Zionism, on the whole, comes from, unless it's a core group of anti-Zionists, right? You look at the concentric circles of people around them who they influence, comes from a lack of understanding about why there is a need for the state of Israel to exist. How, since the expulsion of our people thousands of years ago, the Jews have never actually been safe, right? For their ebbs and flows, so to put aside the safety of the Jewish people, if you know that the state of Israel for so many Jews needs to exist for our own safety, and knowing that still perpetuate anti-Zionism, and anti-Zionism usually comes alongside a lot of other anti-Semitic tropes and ideas and can perpetuate the dehumanization of Jews. So I think really has to be situation by situation. And that being said, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that accompanies anti-Zionism. It's like they're buddies almost all the time. So it's tough.
Will, how would you, thank you. Will, how would you make that distinction?
I think since...
Clarify and verify.
I think since October 7th, I think there is I think there's no line anymore. I think it has sort of moved completely into straight out anti-Semitism. And you can say that because why are there synagogues being firebombed? Why is there graffiti on JFS? That's like against the occupation or whatever. So I think that says to me that thing that we tried to, and I think a lot of people who, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, I do think we have to not scream anti-Semitism at every single moment, because I don't think it does anybody any good, and it does shut down conversation. It's like we try to use it as a trump card. I don't think that's useful. And I think we need to also call it out when it's just pretty clear that's what it is. Again, I think it comes from unconscious bias. I don't think people recognize that what they are claiming is just critiquing an occupier or whatever you want to say. It's actually anti-Semitism, and I think we need to be comfortable calling that out as well. Depending on, as you said, it's like depending on the individual, you have to do it in a way that's appropriate. And there are some people I'm not even going to bother spending my oxygen talking to them because they're never going to change.
Rivy, bring us home. Last comment.
Okay, well, I would actually not say that there's a state of Israel because Jews have to be safe. I would say we have Medinat Yisrael and we have Eretz Yisrael because, I'm going to say it, God gave the Jewish people, Lech lecha me'artzecha, that it is a holy land and is a holy land for the Jewish people. I feel different there than I feel here. Why do I have to justify that? Why does America have America? Why does Italy have Italy? Why does England have England? That is our country, and we have been in that country for 3,000 years, and there has been a steady population of Jewish people there for all of those years. And every single time you and I open up our prayer book 3 times a day, we say, we say, that is our land, and when are we going back? And we have, Israel is the land of the Jewish people, and I feel safe in America, but I have state of Israel because that is the land of the Jewish people, and it is the land that I know I love, and I loved it from the minute I walked down on it when I was 10 years old, and it is a very emotional connection.
Are you saying, just out of curiosity, I know we have to end, but are you then saying it's not?
Rabbis.
That question though about anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism.
I don't think you can separate them. I think, if you hadn't noticed, I grew up in the religious Zionist movement, and yes, and the Eretz Yisrael, Torah Yisrael, the Eretz Yisrael, that is what we deeply believe in, and I feel so strongly about the fact that Israel is a place that we love. It is our home. It is our homeland. We all have our different reasons why we are here, and I hope that we're here to strengthen each other and to teach Torah and be with each other and build a Jewish community, because not everyone can be able to go to Israel, but it is our land. It is part of who we are.
Wonderful. Please give my fellow participants a round of applause.
Thank you to our host.
And again, I just want to say how grateful we all are to Joe Schocken, Michelle Rosen, and Steve Loeb for their incredible support. We are going to be doing this in an ongoing way. There are going to be some follow-ups that we're going to send to people who registered, some follow-up materials and resources, and we're going to be having a number of different programs and opportunities to continue this conversation throughout this year, including key speakers that we're going to be bringing in and opportunities to gather in conversation. So thank you very much, and we will be available to talk to whomever outside to continue the conversation and to process this. But thank you very much. Give yourselves a hand, and we shall see you. Thank you.